everyone, welcome to all 4 e-learning classes. This is session 12. Regulation activity of respiration, where first of all we'll discuss the neural activity. See the diagram, diagrammatic explanation now we'll see. This is diaphragm. This is diaphragm. Next, this is the ribs. Generally, the neural activity we have discussed that it is with the neural center. The neural center includes medullary or medulla center. One is the medulla center and another is said to be the pons center. The neural activity is involving the neurons. Neural activity involves the neurons, which means the stimulation in a respective part is detected by neurons. What neurons receive the stimulus? What causes the either inspiration or respiration? What I am going to say is the neural activity involve the brain, which is with the medulla oblongata, one center, and another is the pons. Here in this connection already I told you that the medulla oblongata is with the respiratory rhythmic center. Respiratory rhythmic center is a center which maintains the homeostasis of the inhalation and exhalation. So that is how the medulla center performs. And this medulla center includes the dorsal and the ventral. Dorsal respiratory group, DRG. Dorsal respiratory group. Dorsal respiratory group. Next, ventral respiratory group. Ventral respiratory group. Dorsal respiratory group and ventral respiratory group. Look at here. This is the dorsal respiratory group and here this is the ventral respiratory group. DRG and VRG. Dorsal respiratory group is a group which is for, it causes the inspiration. It causes the inspiration. Dorsal respiratory group causes the inspiration. In the same way, ventral respiratory group causes either inspiration, it is for either inspiration or the expiration either inspiration or expiration. Either inspiration or expiration. This is what we see. There are two groups, name it to be the dorsal respiratory group and the ventral respiratory group. Medulla oblongata is with the dorsal respiratory group and ventral respiratory group. The dorsal respiratory group present on the dorsal side of the medulla oblongata. And this is with the respiratory rhythmic center. So entire medulla oblongata is with the respiratory rhythmic center. Rhythmic continuity. What continuity? Both inspiration and expiration. So in this connection, dorsal respiratory group is one more subdivision and ventral respiratory group is the another. Dorsal respiratory group present on the dorsal side of the medulla oblongata and it is for the, it causes the inspiration. Whereas the ventral respiratory group is present on the ventral side, which is for both inspiration and expiration, which means it causes the inspiration and expiration. How? That is the stimulation from the diaphragm and the ribs. The dorsal respiratory group give the necessary signal to the what is called the ribs and the diaphragm. Look at here. In the same way, the ventral respiratory group give the necessary signal to the diaphragm as well as the ribs for the either inspiration or expiration. That's the reason why we say dorsal respiratory group causes the, it's all a neural activity. The neurons which send the signal to the medulla oblongata, where respiratory rhythmic center, which is with the two groups, one dorsal respiratory group and another is the ventral respiratory group, which give a necessary signal to the ribs and diaphragm. That is, in ribs, the external intercostal muscles are for external intercostal muscles and phrenic muscles whose contraction the inspiration takes place. Whereas expiration in which the external intercostal muscles relax or else the phrenic muscles also relax, which means the contraction and relaxation of both the external and the external intercostal muscles and the phrenic muscles. Contraction and relaxation is regulated by the respiratory rhythmic center, which is with the what is called a DRG and VRG, dorsal respiratory group and ventral respiratory group. So this is how it is regulated. Next, the another one is named to be the Pons center. A Pons is what said to be pneumotaxic center. Pneumotaxic center. Pons is with the pneumotoxic center. Pneumotoxic center is the one which reduces the duration of inspiration. What do you mean by duration? If there is a duration, means there is a gap, means there is a breathlessness or else interruption in the breathing. Is it right or not? Duration if more, there is a delay in breathing or breathlessness. So, the pneumotoxic center present close to the pons is what reduces the duration of the inspiration. When duration of inspiration is reduced, nothing but breathing is continuous. That's what we see, the pneumotoxic center present close to the pons is reducing the duration of inspiration. At the same time, this is responsible for the depth of the breath, depth of the respiratory rate and breath are also controlled by rate of the breathing, and depth of the breathing is maintained by pons, which is with the pneumotoxic center. One more center also present, that is anoustic center, which is a hypothetical. It is considered anoustic center. Anoustic center and pneumotaxic center. However, this is whose function is not clearly understood. It is considered that anoustic center also work with the pneumotaxic center. So, the neural activity, which is two portions, two parts. One is the medulla center and another is the pons center. Medulla center is the one. Medulla oblongata is with the center named to be the respiratory rhythmic center. The respiratory rhythmic center present in the medulla oblongata have two groups of neurons. One is the dorsal respiratory group of neurons and another is the ventral respiratory group of neurons. So, now how it is controlled means what group of neurons stimulation gives, that is controlled. For suppose if the inspiration is suffering, a person is suffering from the inspiration or expiration, that's how the type of group of neuron giving signal stimulation to the medulla oblongata, that is being regulated. So dorsal respiratory group which causes the inspiration, ventral respiratory group that causes the either inspiration or expiration. And diagrammatically we can see that is the ventral respiratory group and the dorsal respiratory group are innervating into the diaphragm and the ribs, thereby they regulate the inspiration and expiration. The second one is the Pons center. Pons center is with the pneumotoxic center and the enuestic center. Pneumotoxic center is the one which is reduces the duration of inspiration. And the rate of breathing and the depth of the breathing also controlled by pneumotoxic center. That's what the neural regulation control. Next, chemical control. Chemical control. Chemical control also that involve, for suppose, if CO2 and H plus ions are increased, what do you mean by that? It means that as CO2 is more in the blood, or else CO2 which is combined with the H2 and forms the H2CO3, which is immediately break down into H plus and HCO3. As more and more H plus and CO2 are present in the blood, it is detected by the what is called, first, as these are chemicals, so it is named to be the chemical or chemosensitive area, as well as the another one is named to be the receptors associated with the aortic arch and the carotid artery. So chemical regulation involved the one said to be the chemosensitive area and another receptors associated with the aortic arch and the carotid artery. That we'll see right now. Chemosensitive area, chemical regulation. Chemical regulation. Chemical regulation, which includes the one, chemosensitive area. Chemosensitive area. Chemosensitive area, as well as the aortic arches, receptors associated with sensory receptors of the aortic arches and the carotid artery. So this is a chemical regulation activity. Chemosensitive area, that is nearer to the medulla oblongata, where chemosensitive area is present, which detect the chemicals called CO2 as well as the H plus. Chemosensitive area is what capable of detecting the CO2 and H plus, which means there is more carbon dioxide as well as the H plus ions. So carbon dioxide needs to be sent out. This is the carbon dioxide and H plus ions are detected by chemosensitive area and give a necessary signal to the respiratory rhythmic center present in the medulla oblongata. Immediately, medulla oblongata containing a respiratory rhythmic center give necessary signals. So first, the CO2H plus is detected by chemosensitive area, give the signal to the medulla oblongata, and that give the necessary signal to the intercostal muscles and diaphragm. Intercostal muscles which is present in the ribs and the diaphragm with the phrenic muscles, these two muscles respond and expels the carbon dioxide to the outside. So first of all, it is to be detected. That is chemosensitive area detect this CO2 and H plus ion concentration and give the necessary signal to the chemosensitive area, give the signals to the medulla oblongata, and that in turn give the signal to the ribs as well as the diaphragm. So it forcibly expels the carbon dioxide to the outside. That's what a chemical regulation. The another is look at here, a diagram shows generally the aortic arches in the sense it is a blood vessel. Carotid artery and aortic arch are the blood vessels. Aortic arch, systemic aortic arch which supplies the oxygen to the different parts. So aortic arches and carotid artery, this is an aortic aortic arch, and the another is for this is the heart to which the carotid artery supplies the blood. So look at here, this is all related with the heart, both are associated with the heart itself. That is this is carotid artery and this is aortic arch. So carotid artery, basically carotid arteries are external carotid and internal carotid which takes the blood. In the circulatory system we discuss the arteries supplying blood from heart to the different parts. In the same way, from different parts, veins are bringing blood to the heart. So, carotid artery and aortic arches, which are the blood vessels, which detects the CO2 and H plus. This is by receptors. Carotid artery and aortic arches are with the sensory receptors. The case with aortic arches are with the sensory receptors as well as carotid artery is also with the sensory receptors. So sensory receptors what detect the presence of CO2 and H plus. The carotid artery which is bifurcated, here where one the receptor is present and here also the receptors large number are present. So this receptor what detect the presence of the CO2 and H plus which is received by glossopharyngeal nerve, glossopharyngeal nerve. That is the receptors present in the carotid artery. Carotid artery what takes the blood to the brain, which is what name it to be the internal and external. This carotid artery which is with the receptors, these receptors what associated with the glossopharyngeal nerve. This glossopharyngeal nerve take the stimulus into the medulla oblongata of the brain. Then the medulla oblongata give the necessary signal to the ribs and the phrenic muscles to send out forcibly expel the CO2. Where what are involved? Receptors. Earlier we have discussed one is the chemosensitive area and another is the detection by sensory receptors, that is of the aortic arches and the carotid artery. So we have discussed the carotid artery. So the receptors of aortic arches and the carotid artery. The carotid artery, which is taking the blood to the brain. Carotid artery, which is divided into external and internal carotid artery, where the receptors detect the presence of the CO2 and H+. So earlier we have discussed directly the neurons detect the presence of the CO2 and H+ by stimulation. That is, in the same manner, here the receptors detect this presence of CO2 and H+ and give the signal to the glossopharyngeal nerve. Nerves are detecting the stimulus from the receptors as the chemical detected by the receptors. So that's what it is, a chemical regulation. Straight away here, chemosensitive area detect the CO2 and H+. Here the receptors detecting this. The receptors are present in both aortic and carotid artery. So first of all, carotid artery that detect the presence of the CO2 and H+ give the signal to the glossopharyngeal nerve. Glossopharyngeal nerve takes it into the medulla oblongata. Next one is the aortic arch. Generally aortic arch in the sense the left systemic aortic arch. The left systemic aortic arch which branched forms as a aorta and that supplies the blood to the different parts. Either it is to the kidneys by renal artery, then to the testes by spermatic, ovarian, abdominal, iliac. Likewise, it is supplying to different parts. So, this aortic arches also have the receptors. These receptors once detect the stimulus, give a signal to what is called a nerve, name it to be the vagus nerve or vagus nerve. And this vagus nerve take the impulses to the brain, that is medulla oblongata. Again the respiratory rhythmic center receive the signal via the receptors to the vagus nerve, then to the medulla oblongata, and it gives the necessary signal to the ribs and diaphragm to expel the carbon dioxide to the outside. So the presence of the CO2 and H+ detected by receptors. Receptors present in the carotid artery and aortic arch. Then the carotid artery that is with the receptor detect the CO2 and H+, give the necessary signal to the stimulus to the glossopharyngeal. Glossopharyngeal nerve take it into the medulla oblongata nearer to the respiratory rhythmic center, and which give the signal to the diaphragm and the phrenic muscle to send out the CO2 outside. The same way aortic arches. Aortic arches containing the receptors, with the receptor give the signal to the vagus to the medulla oblongata respiratory rhythmic center, that in turn to the ribs and the diaphragm. So this is how the chemical activity, which includes the chemosensitive area and the receptors of the aortic arches and the carotid artery. All this explains that detection of CO2 itself, which means the respiration regulation activity is significant towards the CO2. That is, CO2 have significant role. CO2 only regulate the activity of the respiration, but O2 have insignificant role. So far in all instances, we discussed that the detection of the CO2, nothing but the H plus also, which give the signal to the brain respiratory rhythmic center and the pons pneumotoxic center that give the signal to the ribs and diaphragm, sending out the expelling air outside. So O2 have insignificant role in regulation activity of respiration. Insignificant, not having role. CO2 only responsible for the regulation activity of the respiration, whereas O2 have insignificant role or no role. So this entirely is related to the regulation of activity of the respiration. So all what we have seen so far, if you have a glance, what we have discussed today, the transport of O2 and CO2, transport of O2, gases are transported via the blood, which is by both plasma and the RBC. In the case of the RBC, O2 transport is in two forms. One is by plasma and another is by RBC. CO2 is by three forms. One is named to be the physical solution, and the second one is carbamino compounds. Third one is by bicarbonates. So most of the carbon dioxide transported by CO2. By bicarbonates form, most of the CO2 by bicarbonates form, where there is a role of a carbonic anhydrase. Carbonic anhydrase is an enzyme which is for the formation of H2CO3 and its breakdown. Next, this regulation activity in which CO2 is with the key role, whereas O2 have insignificant role. And the Bohr effect as well as Haldane effect we have seen. Bohr effect in the sense the effect of the CO2 and H plus on association of the oxygen with the hemoglobin, which means the dissociation of the oxyhemoglobin takes place because of the CO2 and H plus. So effect of CO2 and H plus on the oxygen carrying capacity, which which promote the transport of O2 to the tissues. Haldane effect, the effect of O2 on the CO2 and H plus unloading, which means by Haldane effect CO2 is transported outside. By Bohr effect, O2 is transported to the tissues or else delivered to the tissues, which means Bohr effect promotes the delivery of the oxygen to the tissues. Haldane effect promotes the transport of or sending out the carbon dioxide to the outside. Both are what having a significance. They are one against the another. One unloads the oxygen, another unloads the CO2 to the outside. Generally, we do also discuss here the altitude sickness. Earlier we have seen altitude sickness. Altitude sickness in the sense when people go above the sea level, that is when people go to the high places, that is for suppose if one reaches 6,000 meters away from the sea level, definitely they are prone for altitude sickness, which is having the effect on digestive system and nervous system, also respiratory system. There are three effects by altitude sickness. Altitude sickness is one affected when people reach the, for suppose mountaineers when reach the height places. That's the reason why they carry the oxygen cylinders. which provide the oxygen. As we go to the high places, the more you go high places, the partial pressure of carbon dioxide decreases. The availability of oxygen at the high places is very low, and it leads to altitude sickness. This altitude sickness showing effect on digestive system, respiratory system, and neural system. This is what we see, the effect of the altitude sickness on the three systems. One is named to be the digestive system, that is, there are the defects named to be the anorexia in the sense loss of appetite. Anorexia. Next, nausea, feeling of sickness as well as feeling of vomiting. These are all digestive problem or not? Vomiting sensation we have seen, forcibly expelling the content of the stomach to the outside, that is vomiting. Vomiting precedes by nausea what first, followed by vomiting. So that's what digestive problem. Respiratory problem, where breathless condition seen, breathless condition, and the neural system effect involve the headache, and the weakness are what the symptoms we see. So altitude sickness is one of the problem, one prone for the height places, that showing effect on digestive system, respiratory system, and neural system. The digestive system, anorexia, loss of appetite, one loses the appetite, hunger. Next, nausea, vomiting. Next, respiratory problems include the breathlessness condition, breathless. That is, there is a duration in inspiration and expiration. One fails to breathe, breathlessness, and neural system problems are headache and weakness.